Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Reality of Ag Data Today and Tomorrow, presented by Agricultural Data Coalition, a nonprofit organization focused on connecting the dots across food and agriculture. I'm Larry Aylward, the custom content editor for Meister Media Worldwide, the publisher of CropLife magazine, and I'll be moderating the webinar, which will feature a panelist discussion. Today's four panelists will examine the reality of ag data use and management and where it's headed. The group will discuss some of the challenges they see now and what the future of data in farming may look like from their various perspectives. This webinar has been approved for 1/2 CEU credit in Precision Ag from CCA. To receive the credit, you must watch the entire webinar. A QR code for reporting your credit will be provided at the end of the webinar. You simply scan the QR code and submit it. We'll also have time for questions at the end of the webinar. If you would like to ask a question anytime during the presentation, just type it in the question pane at the lower corner of your screen and click submit. Questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our four panelists. Dr. James V. Krogmeyer is a professor of electrical and computer engineering at Purdue University. You can see the chalkboards behind him. His research interests include the application of signal processing and wireless communications, adaptive filtering, channel equalization, synchronization, precision agriculture, and intelligent transportation systems. Dr. Krogmeyer is also a co-founder of the Open Agricultural Technology and Systems Center with a mission to research and promote open source technologies for agriculture and food systems. Also on the panel today is Michael Gomes, the Vice President of Strategic Business Development and Agriculture for Topcon Positioning Group. His responsibilities combine strategic relationships, product development, and business strategy to drive growth. Michael has been active in the digital transformation of agriculture since 1994, as it continues to evolve from position technologies to decision-based systems. Our next panelist is Paul Sturgis, the agronomy manager for Crop IMS. Paul has been working directly with farmers for 35 years. He provides full crop advising services, including nutrient management planning, crop protection planning, crop financial budgets, data management, and crop scouting. Our fourth panelist is Ryan Kister, a corn and soybean farmer in Southwest Wisconsin and a YouTube star. Ryan is the host of the YouTube channel How Farms Work, which has 302,000 subscribers and counting. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you. All right, well, let's get right to it. Our first discussion point in question. Precision ag has evolved. No longer is it good enough to just collect data, but additional focus is needed to collect quality data. What triggers or ROI factors will be needed for growers to ensure they have accurate seed variety / hybrid or product information captured within a work record? Knowing the rate applied is important and relatively easy to capture, but how much incentive is needed to make sure that what today is generally manually entered data is captured, not just entering a number one, with the product being applied in the monitor? Dr. Krogmeyer, let's start with you. What are your thoughts on this?
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. When I read this question, I thought, ROI. So whose ROI are we talking about here? Is this the whose return and then whose investment? when I first thought of this, it strikes me that we're talking about the farmer or the operator of the machine. So really the investment here in one aspect is the time that the operator is going to use in order to figure out how to address that into the monitor, that sort of thing. I think a lot of times we sort of forget the fact that a farm operator is kind of a logistics business. Farming is a logistics business. Typically what needs to be done is there's a particular amount of work that needs to be done on a particular day. The weather's moving in. How do I spend my time? Do I spend my time poking around a monitor, trying to figure out how to make something run, or do I enter one? Maybe I enter one because I don't think that it's all that important. So a lot of times the question, I think, comes down to the perception on the part of the operator or the farmer, the value of that data. And I think at the end of the season, boy, you know, when they're making decisions as to what to do next season, the data becomes quite valuable to them. But at that point, maybe it's forgotten. So I think the thing that we have to do or have to figure out is how to give it a little more value in the moment. In that moment when they're sitting there at the monitor trying to get the machine running when the weather's starting to change, you know, to make it important enough. Or possibly to build in systems that are able to come back and remind the farmer afterwards. So if it's not completely entered, something that comes back over the internet and says, hey, you were running that day, yesterday, this morning, whatever it was, you entered one. Is that your final answer, or would you like to correct that? I think you got to sort of keep in mind there's a human being in the loop. As long as there's going to be a human being in the loop, they're going to take human decisions. And one of the problems with this sort of data is it may not be that important to them at the very moment they're recording it. So that's my feeling on it there. Because it's a logistics business, you know, the real issue is how do you make it valuable in the moment so that they'll record good data? At any rate, I feel like in some sense, you know, it's also a function of the fact that the systems aren't completely integrated. The value of that data maybe isn't known there in the monitor right now. It's going to be known later in some other system. So if there were connections that were made through the cloud or through the internet that were able to remind you right away, like, for example, you were entering the product. You already have a list of products there in the monitor. You got it from the cloud this morning. It's all connected up. Now you're not picking one, you're picking out of a choice of those that you have. You know what I mean? You don't have to type it in. So it's all those kinds of things to make it easier and easier. And then perhaps systems that would allow you to correct it after the fact, if in fact you were in too big a hurry to do it right the first time. Maybe I should let other folks speak a little bit, but that's my first gut reaction is that.
Thank you, Doctor. Well, very well-rounded, thought-out answer. Mike, what are your thoughts?
Well, Topcon, we're a manufacturer of hardware, and so easy to use is a big, important part of the process, right? I think Dr. Krugmeyer also brought up the idea of that it needs to be aligned to the workflow, right? So that way it has to fit your practice, right? But probably the most important thing is that, you know, today's equipment today is becoming both smart and connected, right? As we've talked about. And so now it's beginning to leverage that, right? It's that time value of data, right? Is the squeeze worth the juice, right? That kind of thing. And so, because the last thing anybody wants to do is to stop their operations. They're when you're in the moment, you're moving. And so I think it's, you know, the idea that you're easily aligned, that you know, and not today, but certainly in the future, where the seed tender can talk to the tractor, and instead of having to manually enter data, it flows from place to place, right? And so that to me really, you know, if it's not easy to use, people don't use it, right? Why do people plant number one? Because it's easy, right? It's the button right there. And so that's kind of what I think. But so let's ask some of the other panelists.
Okay. Paul, let's go to you, sir. What are your thoughts?
Well, you know, I've been, you know, consulting here since 2000, and you know, the first yield monitor came back in '92, so that's 31 years that growers have been collecting data, you know, to some extent, and really collecting the data doesn't seem to be that difficult, right? Is that like the dude like Mike and Jim said, you just can press one and you take the easy button. But the real difficult part is then interpreting. And when I thought about a trigger, what triggers a person to try to do a better job is return on investment and really profit per acre. Recently here, we had a very large, at least for our area, grower being here in Wisconsin, or we tried to calculate profit per acre for him. And we gathered as much information as we possibly could. Tillage passes, obviously seed inputs, crop protection, land costs, even overhead costs, and they do all their own application. We put a cost to their own application. And I think we really got a really good cost per acre. And then with the software that we use, we were able to input that in and then overlay yield data with that and create a profitability or non-profitability, in some cases, map, spatial map. And when they've seen that, it really clicked with them that, and then of course you ask the question, well, why is this part of the field so profitable and this part of the field not? And you just keep creating all these questions. But for them, it really clicked why it was important to collect data and not punch in one. But if we've got software where we can go back and recalibrate things, or if I have a paper copy, which I still try to get my growers to write things down as a backup, and we can go back and fill those missing pieces in when it comes to maybe a variety or something like that. So I think, and that's something that, I really like to dig into budgets and profitability per acre, but you really got to have good data. And I think once a grower sees some of that, then it really kind of clicks with them. But then it's up to them when push comes to shove the next spring of, making sure that correct stuff is there and relaying that to other employees too, because it's not, as farms get bigger, it's not just Ryan there on his own farm. He may have multiple people dealing with those monitors and controllers, and he has to convey that to them, the importance that they're not just pressing in one. So that's where I think a real trigger is at least with the growers I'm working with so far. So.
All right, thank you, Paul, very much. Ryan, let's get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I agree with the other three panelists. They had a lot of good points. And like Paul said, I think it's pretty important that the farmer is able to see how that data is being used, how it's beneficial to them, to make sure that they're prioritizing, making sure that all of their employees, everybody who's working on the farm, is paying special attention to entering that data. And it's important, I think, that the farmer should be able to immediately spin around and see that data and have access to it. I believe it was James that talked about the cloud access, and I do think that's also important because we just started getting into more of the data collection side in 2016, and I've seen the transition of us just throwing the yield monitor in the combine and having that data available to us to actually starting to apply different rates of like fertilizer with that same monitor. And one of the biggest restrictions that we've had is moving that data from the monitor to our software applications that allow us to have a look at it and make decisions. So it's important to make sure that the data is available to you when you're looking for it and when you want to make future choices using it. And I think that it's important that the farmer's involved with all of those subsequent decisions so that they're just not entering the data and going, it's my agronomist problem, So, but I think that it's important to get the farmer involved.
But Ryan, I think you bring up a really important point about the yield being the revenue report card, right? Being able to link it back to profitability is a really key point for growers, I know.
Yeah, it really hits home for the farmer when you can actually start to see the difference that it makes on your operation. And over the years, as long as the farmer is making an effort to improve their own operation, I think they'll see it.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Let's move on to the next question. Whether pushed by traceability efforts, carbon or sustainability programs, landlord requests or government reporting, there is a growing demand for farmer data. Do you see farmers shifting from being, quote, absentee data owners, end quote, relying on their service providers to collect and store data from their operations, to prioritizing data collection and storage as a key part of their operation? Mike, let's start with you on that.
Sure thing. Thanks very much. And so from our perspective, I think probably the most important thing is that farmers do what makes sense for them. Farmers do what's profitable for them, right? And so if it's profitable for them to collect the data, then they will, right? And if they can use it, leverage it, right? So to me, when we begin to talk about data, because everybody talks about it pretty esoterically, when people talk about data, to me, data is nothing more than documentation of practice, right? And 199 out of 200 growers I know, 199 of them are always doing the right thing every time, right? And so to me, we don't need to be scared of that data. That data is documentation of practice. It shows that we're doing the right thing, right? It helps us make better decisions. Now, it's got to be easy, right? I think things like telematics, so that now I don't have to take it from the USB thumb drive and move it around manually. But I think data, when it's enabled by things like telematics, as the digitization, and you can begin to use those digital data layers, right? When you can do that, when you can get the variable rate application validated by the yield map, so that then you can begin to see some cause and effect, I think that really helps, right? And to me, as we get to, the first one is compliance reporting, and being able to use the data layers today, whether that's as applied data as part of your production reporting, right? Or whether it's yield mapping as part of your crop insurance compliance process. To me, when the data layers fit to a workflow and when they can easily be used, right? So that then they can be used by other valued partners or other trusted advisors in the system. That's really, for me, when it starts to become easier, right? When that data fits to a workflow and I can enable and share it. That's part of one of the things that the Ag Data Coalition really works towards is permissions-based sharing, and the idea that you as a farmer and your trusted advisors can easily work with that data.
All right, Mike, thank you very much. Great answer. Paul, let's move on to you and your views on this.
So again, being here in Wisconsin, central Wisconsin specifically, most of our clients are large dairymen. So, that the main reason they hired me is they're cattlemen, and they want me to take, at least take care of some of that agronomy stuff. And I've been told a few times, that's why I hire you. You take care of that. And but so I do try to impress upon that they need to have ownership of all of that agronomy stuff too. But and we do work with some non-cattle farmers, such as like a person like Ryan, and even they to some degree still rely on us to collect and hold that data for them, and then they'll start looking at yield maps, and then they'll rely on us for why is this happening here? Or what do you think about this? And try to, really dig into that stuff. And, farmers they do a tremendous number of tasks over the course of a year, and handling data is kind of one of them things where they maybe only touch a few times, maybe at the end of the season, maybe at the very beginning of spring to get things ready. But, it's kind of difficult, it seems, for them to come up with a good organized way. And I think, also with the ADC or the Ag Data Coalition, with what they've developed, that might be a very nice depository. At least that's what I think, for them to be able to keep that ownership there too, and whatnot, and a nice storage system. And I can work with them to keep it organized within that storage system. But frankly, I think especially, again, and I'm just looking at my client base. It's not huge, but they're most, fairly large growers, and they're little on that older side. And I think, frankly, a lot of those guys would rather spin wrenches in the shop than sit down in the office and look at data, So, so I think we're going to probably still be the, quote unquote holders, while trying to keep them having that ownership and whatnot. So,
okay. Thanks, Paul. Ryan, let's get your thoughts on this.
I agree with Paul on farmers looking at their data as kind of like a marginal thing that they worry about. And I can see how it changes over the years between the age of the farmer. And I definitely see some of the older generation being more of absentee data owners. But I also think there's a short window from when you actually start collecting that data where you go from being an absentee data owner where you're not totally sure what to make of that data to actually using it and prioritizing it in your operation. And looking back over the years, we have gone from being, just kind of collecting the data and handing that off, like Paul said, to our agronomists, his problem, we worry about a dozen tasks in a single day. And some of that stuff, it just depends on whether or not you think that you're going to get any real use out of it, or if the farmer feels like he can utilize it to his advantage, whereas like in agronomy, I'll admit our agronomist knows a heck of a lot more about using different hybrids over the years and looking at how previous hybrids have performed in different areas. So having someone else involved that's used to managing that data is definitely important. And I don't see, I kind of think it goes hand in hand where farmers aren't going to, just prioritize the data to where that's what they're doing all the time. Pulling it up and looking, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Usually we're going to make a plan and stick with it. If we have an agronomist that's going to worry about it for us, then we're not going to worry about that data.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks, Ryan. James, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm thinking that farm data is business data, and the farm is a business, and the business is one of taking all of these inputs, machines, people, seeds, crop protection, these kinds of things, and getting them to the right place at the right time. And so because that data is important and integral to the farm and the farmer and its profitability, I think farmers will always want to be more than, say, absentee data owners. But I think, in addition, they're not likely to become, they don't want to be engaged in the manipulation and in the management of that data. So there's very likely going to be consultants or advisors that may grow out of agronomy but may become bigger or more whole farm operations type advisors, that look at all of this data, part of which is agronomy data, but part of which is just how does it run data, and create suggestions and things like this for better improvements. But the farmers are always going to be the end deciders of that. They know what makes them profitable and what does not. And while I think, profitability maps are interesting, it's got to be some actionable thing. If it says that you shouldn't plant the corn in this spot, what do I do? Do I plant grass or just leave it? There's got to be some action that can be taken, or the data doesn't really have much value. And I think that kind of comes back, obviously, as well to the quality of the data. If it's not seemed to be valuable in the moment, it's a little harder to make sure that it's carefully taken. Anyway, I think you're going to see, though, on some of these things like traceability, sustainability, insurance programs, there's going to be a push for more and more of this. And this is why an advisor kind of consultant thing may pop up, because it's not primarily what the farmer needs to be doing. I don't know what they want to be doing, but they want to get their crop in and they want to succeed, and these things will need to be done, but they're always going to seem, I think, like a distraction from the main event of today. So I feel like there will have to be a business model that sort of enables that. And farmers will want to own their data, and they'll want to see insights from that. And those sorts of advisors that can bring that to them will probably succeed at this. I guess that's probably enough for the moment. I'll pontificate more on the next question.
Thanks, James. Thanks, all panelists. Great job answering that. Okay, before we move on to our next talking point, we're going to conduct a poll question. And I'm going to send that out right now to the audience. There it goes. The question is, do you or do your service providers charge specifically for or include a line item within a precision services package for data collection, organization, and storage? And we'll give our audience a little time to answer that. And we're going to move on to the next talking point, and then we'll come back to the question results and discuss that for a minute or two. Okay, let's go on to the third question talking point. Few systems today track every pass across the field, especially for operations like tillage. Should growers start documenting more operations today? So if they need to provide information in the future that requires 5 or 10 years worth of historical data, that they have records showing what was used at what settings or what manure was applied from what source. Paul, let's start with you on this. What are your thoughts? And we'll follow then with Ryan, James, and Michael.
Well, I guess to answer the question in one word, absolutely. You know, as we see these carbon and sustainability type programs start, you know, evolving and becoming available, these programs really have the potential to be a significant revenue stream for growers, at least from what I'm seeing. You know, and we at CropIMS, we're working with a company that is one of those, I guess, middlemen, so to speak, and trying to figure out to some degree, what do we all have to have for that type of information to qualify for the highest level of payment, let's be honest. And so, yeah, they're going to have to document virtually everything we do out there. And you know, whether it's paper documentation for some of this, but, you know, like the one grower that we did work on that profitability situation with, he was able to, you know, collect all of that type of information. I think about the only thing that wasn't, you know, really documented very well was maybe our actual scouting trips as we were scouting fields. You know, we had that obviously paper and we got different apps we used for that. So, but we weren't able to integrate that into our, we had consulting in there as a cost, but we, you know, some of that other stuff. So, so yeah, we're going to have to figure out this, you know, for a single field or a single acre in many cases too. And again, circling back to that first question where I talked about the profitability maps, you know, if we can, you just got to collect as much as you possibly can and you just kind of weed through it, but definitely going to have to figure out ways to collect all of this information every time you touch a field virtually. So.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Ryan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so as a farmer, I want to say that it shouldn't be necessary. And I still don't think it's absolutely necessary at this point in time to be recording every single pass across the field. However, I think looking to the future, that everything that you can do to have a better history, a better knowledge on what's happened in the past is only going to set you forward and is only going to help you out going forward into the future. And that data is important. And if you want to make decisions down the road, like if you're going to switch over to organics, that's something where you're going to need to have a history and you're going to have to be able to show that in order to make that kind of change. So necessary, not yet, but I think that it is important and it should be prioritized.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan. Dr. Krogmeyer, your thoughts?
Well, actually, this one interests me quite a bit because we've spent a fair bit of research effort in project we sort of call tracks, which is what can you use when all you're doing is recording the tracks of all the machines on your farm. Because we kind of look at it as sort of what I would call a metadata sensor in a way, even when it's just tillage or it's a machine moving around or this sort of thing. If we're able to build AI or machine learning systems that are able to look at what's going on and estimate the activity the farmer is taking, we can start to build up a record of things that are going on that might then be integrated with sensor data that might be on the machines. So merely knowing what's connected to what and what's moving around the field and which operator's on the machine can tell you some things that are very difficult to get otherwise. And they may also partially solve this problem of manual entry of data, because you can estimate and guesstimate a variety of things that are happening just by looking at the tracks. I mean, you know this. You can watch the farm. You know it's tilling. It's going back and forth on the field, this sort of thing. There's no reason we can't build machine systems that would do this. In 1 year, I'm a landlord of a farm in Colorado. It's one of the reasons I got into this business is my poor brothers have to put up with me putting gadgets on their machines and that sort of thing. But we tracked them all through harvest, tracked all their truckloads, tracked them to the grain elevators and the dumps. And we come up with, just using time that a combine is near a cart goes to truck, calculate the load at the elevator. We come within, just by time and the unloading rate of the machine they were using, we were able to guesstimate their yield within 7%. I think that's kind of remarkable. We did not go into the CAN bus to get any data there. So there's a lot of value in this sort of thing, I think, as ways to check other data sources or to provide metadata for it. And then obviously in the long run, we're liable to see more and more need to prove things. Certain practices you're doing that you might be getting a payment for and this kind of thing. This could also be used that way. I'd prefer the government wasn't necessarily sticking their nose in the business of where I am at every single moment. So this would be, in my view, kind of private data that a farmer might use in order to understand their business better. But at some point, they may need to be able to prove certain derivatives from this data to regulators. So I think it's coming. And I also think it's got to be cheap and it's got to be autonomous. That's the other thing. If the farmers has to wrangle that data, now we're saying let's make the data times 10 bigger and make the farmer wrangle the data, it's not going to be any good.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, James. Michael, what are your thoughts?
Well, I believe that when it comes to things like this, you want to be from Missouri, the show me state, right? This is about show me the money, okay? So I was jotting down a few notes here, right, of examples that I can think of, right? So, how do you show me the money in data, right? So one example of show me the money in data is using the as applied data from your planting process as your acreage reporting, right? Because when you do that, you get a more accurate number, right? And so when you review that data, typically how accurate? Typically between 4 and 7% and more accurate. That's a number that came up through some work done by MyAgData that's been doing these kinds of things. And TopCon works at this at www.cropreporting.com, right? And so the idea that you can use your as applied data, an existing data layer that's easy to collect today, but it can create value for you, right? In reducing your insurance cost, right? And our customers in Brazil use a particular software suite called our controlled traffic suite, which is pretty similar to what people do in strip till, where you're following the line, right? And when you can follow that line and you can reduce crop loss, you can preserve the integrity of that, you can create yield, that's significant, right? And where they farm the same line or the same cropping line for multiple years, the payback on that is significant in sugarcane. To me, I was also thinking through some of our air seeder customers beginning to use things like downforce or packing pressure, so that way they can begin to estimate what compaction might be, or just understanding packing pressure by soil type, so that then they can treat different areas of the field differently, right? And then also with our tillage depth control, being able to keep track of things like soil roughness, surface roughness, so that then you can begin to estimate. And so to me, It depends. Every operation's a little bit different, but it's thinking through what are the KPIs, what are the key productivity indicators, what's the right data I need to collect, and or what's the thing I want to measure, and then what's the data layer I can collect that enables that, right? Because it's all about show me the money. How can you find data layers that create value for you and your operation, whether that's through efficiency and time or productivity or reducing hard cost?
All right. Thank you, Mike. Well said. Thank you, gentlemen. All right, we do have results of the first question. The question, once again, was, do you or do your service providers charge specifically for or include a line item within a precision services package for data collection, organization, and storage? And a resounding 70% said no. Any thoughts there, gentlemen? Anybody want to comment on that finding?
I would say that, I mean, farmers are businesses first, right? And so if they're not collecting the data, it's because they don't yet see the value. And so that's the challenge and the opportunity in that statement to me.
Okay.
Personally, I see that the question was whether it's charged as a line item. Depending on who you're working with, it could just be included with everything else. I would say that's how it is for us. Our agronomist does take a lot of that data and use it to make decisions going forward. But is it charged as a specific line item with what we pay for? No, he just does it as part of what he sells us.
Okay.
I'll
Thank you.
echo that. Being on that side of the side of it is that, yeah, we've got a package of services. It's spelled out in a contract with a whole bullet list of items that we'll provide for a certain fee. So it's listed there. Do they really notice it? I don't know. Hard to say, but there's been cases where we've done specific things for a grower. And we'll have it specifically. And I think in the question it mentioned like soil sampling. We invoice soil sampling and lab fees as a separate line item whenever they're incurred. But yeah, no, I've thought about doing that, and I think my superior has mentioned that in the past as we try to maybe key on it a little bit more. So, but yeah, it's usually in a package of items. So.
Okay, great. Thanks. All right. Actually, we're going to send out another question to the audience before we move on to our next talking point. And this question is, do you currently or are you considering providing or purchasing from your service provider a data archival service that would store the original files from a grower's operation? So I'm going to send that out right now to the audience, and we're going to move on to the next talking point, and then we'll come back to that poll question results. Okay, gentlemen. Data ownership /sharing /access still comes up as an issue in the industry. However, most growers seem to be okay providing access to data if they know who they are sharing it with or what they are getting in return. Is this really still an issue or something that just grabs headlines or presents problems for people or organizations that can't clearly explain what they do with the data or what the value is to the grower and therefore have trouble accessing data? Ryan, let's start with you. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so personally, I don't see data ownership being an issue for the farmer, mostly because they're the ones producing the data, so they have to hand it off to everybody else. And personally, I'd like to see where that data is going and what it's used for before sharing. And if the farmer can't see how it benefits them, why would they bother sharing the data or passing it around? And I think that when it comes to benefits to the farmer and why they would share. If it's something that's agreed to when signing up for a service, someone had mentioned it earlier about, I think it might have been Paul, that it's just kind of in a list with other things when they sign up for it. If it's kind of like a terms of service and the farmer is getting benefit out of it, for example, if we were to have our data automatically uploaded through the cloud and available across other platforms, then easily, personally, basically to me, anybody can have that data to an extent, depending on what it is. Because if the farmer's actually getting benefit out of it, they're going to be a heck of a lot more willing to sign up for sharing the data, as long as they're sure that Farmer Joe down the road isn't going to see how their yield turned out last fall and be able to go to their landowner and say, hey, I see that you didn't have a heck of a crop, you mind trying with us for a year? And I think that's kind of maybe like a back of the mind thought for a farmer, is that they're just afraid that it's going to come back to bite them. I don't personally think that it's going to be something that anyone really has to worry about. It just has to be beneficial to the farmer for them to be okay with it, return of service.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ryan. James, your views?
My views really would be very similar. I think if there's perceived value in the sharing of data, then the farmer will agree. I think the farmer, though, wants to know that they're able to revoke that ability should they decide to later. I think that one issue that obviously does matter is it matters a great deal that my intellectual property as a farmer, in other words, my cost of production, my success at production, my ability to grow a crop on a particular field, that's a secret. That's not something you share with your neighbors because maybe they're going to try to get that ground away from you. So you got to think about, that part of it, because they are in effect, they're friendly competition, sometimes not as friendly as others, but hopefully friendly. Those things are important. So if there were ever a time when, data of this nature was leaked or got out or hacked and then used in some way, that would, maybe change the game for sure. But otherwise, as long as it's that sort of innocuous thing that service provider for an agreed upon reason is using it to enable the farmer to do better, they'll share.
Thank you, James. Michael, your thoughts?
Well, I certainly with the Ag Data Coalition, permissions-based data sharing has been absolute front and paramount, right? I think the other side of that is how many growers actually hand off their passwords and their security to their trusted advisors today because they don't have permissions-based sharing, right? And so that's the other side of it. To me, the cloud-based platforms offer a lot of safety and security through 128-bit encryption and a number of other things. The downside of that is that they're dependent upon connectivity, right? You're dependent upon telematics and connectivity. And so for me, I think that, being able to get the data onto the platform or into a safe and secure environment is important. And then you want to be able to have permissions-based sharing with you and your trusted advisors and enabled, right? So that then that way it facilitates the relationship, not complicates the workflow. And so to me, I'm all for it. But I think it's easy to talk about. And so that's where growers, if you're going down this road, you need to really begin to think about what's your strategy, or at least who's your trusted advisor that's helping you in this respect.
All right, thanks, Mike. Paul, your thoughts, sir?
Well, I think data ownership is a really big deal. And, my question, is, do growers generally know where their data is actually going? And Ryan kind of alluded to this, is he'd like to know where it's going to go, but if it's going to certain platforms, and I won't name names. I don't want to get down that road, but once it hits that platform, it's gone. And now, is your neighbor down the road going to see it? More than likely not. You know, it's a little bit more of a bigger issue is what is all this aggregated data going to actually get used for, and where is it going to go? And so, and there's a real monetary response. You know, Mike talked about show me the money earlier, you know, when it comes to data. So there's a real monetary value to this in a sale situation, I think. And if growers are just giving it away, they could be losing out on some dollars there. And, you know, at CropLife here, we're very sensitive to this issue. And in my contracts with growers, you know, we specifically talk about data security and who gets what. And, you know, I've been emailed, called, texted by other people in service industries to say, hey, could you just send me Bob's this information? I'll go, no, sorry, but you know, unless I'll check with the grower, and if he gives me written permission to do it, then I'll give it, because ultimately it's their data, it's their decision, and I can give them my opinion on this whole data security and sensitivity, but ultimately it's theirs. And if they want me to give it to somebody, I'll give it to them, you know, specifically what they want me to give it to them. But I think it's an issue, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, I've got a question for Paul or Ryan. I guess, do you want to touch on a little bit the ability to get the raw data back, right? Or the ability to access that raw data so that then you can take it from platform to platform? Yeah,
you know, years ago, right, we worked with anybody that worked with data. You know, you started out with CF cards, the old flash cards, then you moved into SD cards, then you moved into the USBs, and we've all seen the grower with the drawer full of cards and USB drawer. So to some degree, it was kind of easy to get that back. And what I still don't mind going out and grabbing data, you know, with the grower, obviously for working with the grower off of his monitor, throw it on my laptop, and you know, now I preserve that raw data. And sometimes with the cloud-based systems, sometimes that raw data gets lost, and the ability to move it to a different platform, not always that easy, you know, and we talk all day long about compatibility, and I think maybe we talk about it a little bit later on here too. But I try to really preserve that data, and Mike, you and I have both talked about ADC a little bit here, and you know, we're certainly going to try to move that raw data into an ADC account for growers. And let them, again, control where that goes if we need to go get raw data later on. So I try to preserve it as best I can.
All right, great. Thank you. Okay, we're going to jump to the results of our second poll question. And the question was, do you currently or are you considering providing or purchasing from your service provider a data archival service that would store the original files from a grower's operation? And in a closer vote, we have about 51.5% saying no, and about 48.5% saying yes. But for the sake of time, I'm going to move on to our final talking point. We won't discuss that one. And I'm going to send out actually another survey to the audience for a third and final question. And we'll move on to our final talking point while they're answering that question. Okay, let's move on. It seems autonomous machines are on the cusp of becoming common tools in the field. With this shift, will there be implications for data, both from having not only an accurate prescription map now, but also that trying to mission that plan for the machine? Will these changes help drive solutions to some of the interoperability headaches the industry has struggled to resolve? Or will it exacerbate those issues and create a new level of incompatibility between systems and products? James, let's start with you on that. What are your thoughts?
Wow, what a question.
Yeah.
I think it's actually likely a very good thing, in the sense that, you know, it's my, at least from my belief, the farmer's business is logistics. The farmer's business is running the operation, and the farmer also struggles to get the labor to do this today. So autonomous machines and the ability to sort of get labor productivity, it's what's driven, really, in my view, the business of farming for 100 years. You know, there's been a lot of good things that have gone along in agronomy and these sorts of things, but from the sort of the machine side of things, being able to harvest more farm more with fewer people in order to be more profitable, that's kind of been the driver. And so if autonomous machines support that, they'll be adopted like in a flash. And if they're going to work, they're going to need data that really works together. So at this final thing, I mean, this thing would actually have to produce the data that we want if it's really going to work. I think we're a long ways, unfortunately, maybe from making it work. But I think that it is an important key thing because it addresses the fundamental business of the farmer. You know, agronomy is important to the farmer, but agronomy, the farmer goes out and buys from the seed or from advisors and that sort of thing. It's how that person gets their work done that's the key thing, and this really addresses that. I would say one more thing about autonomous machines would be this, that we think a lot about them autonomously in fields. We rarely think about how we're going to get them from one field to the next. So one of the big issues, in having a big string of autonomous combines would be, if I need 7 people to drive them from field to field, and then they sit at the edge of the field waiting for them to do their work, it's not likely to make that impact on labor productivity that it needs. So that's why it's a harder problem, because it's not just running in the fields. But if it works, it will transform data, I think, because it would finally have to really bring it all together. And I think at that point, it's unlikely that one single OEM is going to drive that whole thing. We're going to need standards, or we're going to have to figure out how to make things work together. So of necessity, okay, it would be a good thing.
All right, thanks, James. Michael, what are your thoughts, sir?
Well, similar to James, I think that standards breed interoperability, right? I think today we see that with tractor implement combinations via ISO 11783 as a standard for tractor and implement, with connectivity around being able to do things. And I think Ag Gateway is doing a great job of trying to get to elements of standards of interoperability around the data layers, right? To me, I'm the guy who lives in California. So, we see a lot of crops go from manual process to some version of mechanization to then some version of automation. And you're beginning to see the beginning of advent of autonomy, right? But along the way, there's quite a bit of machine coordination, right? The coordination of one to another, whether that's tender and tractor or planter or sprayer or combine. It could be elements of assisted or remote operations, right? I think that, that there are a number of things to get us down that road, right? And so to me, the elements of the coordination and the automation, right, those are beginning to get there. And so you can certainly see it. In general, I'm a glass half full guy, and I believe that this comes with it opportunities. There will be challenges along the way. And so to me, it's a journey rather than a destination. And so that we're going all the way along, it just brick by brick, we build the road. And so from mechanization, then we get to automation, then we get to machine coordination, then we get to remote operation, right? On our way to autonomy. And so I think that there's levels there for sure.
All right, thanks, Mike. Paul, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know if kind of like, Jim had said too, I don't know if the issues will ever be completely resolved. It seems like the major OEMs, they like to fiddle around and change formats and they like to be autonomous in and how they do things. And that's where, I deal with almost every color under the sun when it comes to OEMs, when it starts data. So, we don't use I do use, the OEM GIS platforms to some degree, but we also use a third-party one too. And as long as those third-party platforms out there can stay up to speed with updating formats and import formats for data, we'll be fine. We'll be fine. And maybe it will drive some growers to, I think we've seen years ago, we've seen guys that were all green or all red or all whatever color. And then it kind of got to be to a point where, maybe some of those old loyalties disappeared and it's like, well, maybe I've got a green tractor, but I red combine and all kinds of different short line equipment mixed in there. I don't know, maybe it'll go back the other way a little bit again as some of the autonomous stuff, just to have all that compatibility within the farm. I don't know, but guess we'll see. It's going to be a long road, I think, to some degree, like Jim and Mike said. So,
okay, Ryan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that it'll definitely help relieve some of the headaches, but I think it'll also shift that from one kind of headache to a different kind of headache. As far as the autonomous stuff coming in and what is implied with that. One example that I've been asked this question kind of before in a similar manner is like, where I see the autonomous coming in and, how soon do I see it? I don't think that it's something that we're going to have to worry about in the near term, but easily in the next 2, 3, 4 decades, I definitely see the automation taking off, and it changes, the operator has to worry about less as far as getting things to transfer from what they're putting down into the software. But as things get more complex, one of the concerns that I would have is, you just spent a whole day putting variable rate fertilizer down, and then something happens with a platform that you're using to record that data, it gets lost in the process. So where did all, it's same issues, different headaches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great points. And we have the results of a poll question related to this talking point. And the question was, do you think as more autonomous machines enter the market, the issues around data compatibility, accuracy, and access will get better or worse? And we've got a little over 68% saying better, and about 31.5% saying worse. So there you go with that. That is it for the presentation, but in the panel discussion, but we do have some questions here, gentlemen, that we'd like to get to from the audience. So I'm going to read these questions to you, and we can go around the horn a little bit and answer them. First question. What are your thoughts on the necessity of data governance for agricultural? Additionally, do you believe that a policy to assist farmers in managing/governing their data will be necessary? Mike, what are your thoughts there?
Well, I would say it's less about governance and more about protection, right? So for me, where my mind goes to initially is the HIPAA standard for medical, right? The idea that my personal data is mine, right? Now, the hard part is that when I go to the next hospital chain, or if I try to switch doctors, I have to start over with the battery of tests in many cases. And so to me, that's there. It's quite a bit more about thinking through the protections for my data, permissions-based sharing for sure of my data, and then the ability to use my data to my own means and ends. kind of thing. That's at least where my mind goes, but I'm sure some of my fellow panelists have some great comments.
To me, it's primarily a matter of transparency. You know, when I see the word data governance, it scares me a little bit that there's going to be an agency that would start up to worry about this, and probably in its own existence stifle innovation. I hate to see something like that happen. But at the same time, there are big sensitivities about these kinds of things. And what we would hope to have is some sort of transparency so that when a farmer agrees to terms of service, they understand what they mean. And I think one issue might be that, you know, being able to maintain ownership to my data. You know, maybe we part ways with a service provider at some point, but we want to take our data with us. We want to still have access to our data. So I see that is kind of an important thing. So if there was any sort of policy question, that would be where I would go to. Always maintaining that the farmer owns the data generated by the farmer. That doesn't necessarily mean that the farmer owns all the derivatives that might have been generated from that data by a service provider in order to provide their service. That's a gray area that might be a little harder to unwind, but it's pretty difficult to unwind. But you can at least get your data back, and at least you can know what they're doing with it in general.
I don't see governance of that data as a necessity, because introducing governance for it, I mean, in my mind, to me anyway, some of the people who are going to be looking for that data are the government themselves, you know, to be utilizing for even like market purposes. So do I see that as necessary to introduce data governance? I don't really see it as going to benefit the farmer. I see it possibly hurting them more than anything.
I guess when I see governance or hear that, I go to regulation, and not a huge fan of that. I guess I certainly agree with the other three, especially James. Is like, you know, having a product, I guess, like ADC, where a grower can maintain that ownership and decide where it goes. That's the purpose of it, right? With ADC, and so I think that's it, you know, versus the, you know, governance or regulation saying this is how you will collect data and this is how we will store it. Not in favor of that at all.
Okay. Got a couple more questions here. Are sustainability/greenhouse gas programs here to stay or just a passing fad? Do growers and retailers really need to start gearing up to be able to provide information requested by some of those programs? Anybody want to take that one?
Well, it's a real thing out there, and like I said, we as a company are preparing ourselves to work with, you know, help our growers wade through that. You know, there's very large companies in the world that are willing to spend lots of money to show that they're doing things the right way, and that flows down that supply chain, so to speak, all the way to the grower. And so there's some monetary incentive there for the grower to be able to provide certain types of information, like some of the other gentlemen have said, prove what they're doing. And are they here to stay? I don't know. You know, carbon credits kind of made a big flurry a number of years ago, and then they kind of died out. But I think they're carbon credits are making a comeback, but they're kind of low down the chain, so to speak. The sustainability programs are the ones that might be here to stay for a while. And as long as there is a quote unquote call for it higher up, so to speak, it'll be there. So,
yeah.
My thinking is that when the data can differentiate the product so that now I get a revenue stream to it, right? I can somehow associate my best practices or my correct practices in creating more value because I now have the pedigree, and I now have this. I have the proof that I am doing the right things. To me, that's significant, right? Because if there's one thing that farmers need, it's the opportunity to diversify revenue, right? To increase and diversify revenue. And so if the data can do that effectively through GHG or sustainability or other programs, to me, that seems a win for agriculture. But I don't farm for a living either. So that's the other side of that.
Yeah. I mean, here at Purdue, we're writing proposals along these lines, of course. I mean, that's, one of the things we do. As a, brother of farmers who have a kind of independent streak in them, there's probably a fair bit of, skepticism about what the value of this would ultimately turn out to be. They participate in programs of this nature when there's a revenue stream. Usually the revenue stream is provided by the government through some sort of NRCS type program or something like that. I'm not sure they're integrated completely in the actual economics of agriculture, but they're part of the business of being in the farming business. And some of us might wish it was less that way, but it is that way. And so I think it depends a lot on how this all plays out, and perhaps what the science ultimately learns about the importance of the whole thing, that may determine it to some degree. But being prepared is never a dumb thing, because these sorts of things may be driven that way.
Okay, great. Gentlemen, we have time for one more question before we sign off. And here goes. The grower-facing farm management information system has seen a lot of change in the last few years. What do you see as the future for farmer-facing data management tools?
Ease of use.
Yeah, autonomous data that moves autonomously and goes where it needs to be and creates insights automatically for the farmer.
Yeah, easy to use and fit to the work. To me, when it fits to the workflow and creates opportunities, i.e. revenue stream and or documentation of practice or something, some version of a benefit, that's a real positive.
Yep.
Okay. Any other thoughts, gentlemen? Okay. Well, that's going to wrap it up. I want to thank everybody for attending the webinar. And I want to thank the Agricultural Data Coalition for presenting it. Thanks to our excellent panelists, Dr. James Krogmeyer, Michael Gomes, Paul Sturgis, and Ryan Kister for an excellent presentation. Well done, gentlemen. Very well done. Thank you again for joining us today, and have a great day.
Thanks.